Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Today, we're going to talk about how the CARES Act can help your business. My name is Jennifer Doyle, and I am a co-founder and the Vice President of Customer Success and Support here at InspectPoint. I will be moderating the panel or the presentation today. And joining me is Jake. He is our CFO here at InspectPoint. He has a lot of great information about this CARES Act. He's helping us with it and thought that this would be a great presentation to also help everybody else out. There's lots of great information, and he is going to dive into all of that today. Just some quick housekeeping real quick. You may notice on your GoToWebinar control panel over on the right-hand side or wherever you have that little panel that's most likely in the way of whatever you're trying to do right now, you'll notice that there's a questions box. I like to point this out because you may also notice that you are currently muted, and that is so we can keep all background noise to a minimum so we can get through all this really great information. But I like to point out this question box because we want to hear what questions you might have about any of the material that we are going to be covering today. So drop those questions in those question boxes. And then also, if at the end, when we get to the questions part, if you have any questions and would like to ask your question live, this is a new one that we're doing. If you want to ask a question live, just go ahead and raise your hand at the end, and I will, call on you and unmute you, and you can ask your question live. So you have two ways to ask questions. But with that said, we've got a lot of great material to cover. So I am going to hand it over to Jake now, who is going to walk us through the rest of today's presentation.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate you kicking this off for us, and welcome to everyone who's on the webinar with us today. Hopefully we can provide you with some information to help guide your decision-making through this crazy process and crazy times that we're in right now. So just to let you know, so this information that's presented is our personal understanding of the current COVID-19 legislation, and there's 3 of them that have been passed already. And that, but this is not the actual legislation itself. And so that while we understand the bill, what's in it is the implementation by the government and banks may, and it's currently changing. It's literally changing by the hour. So please make sure that you check the FCBA website for more and complete and updated information, because they literally are posting updated guidelines every day. So make sure you check that out. All right, and Jennifer, do I have control here with the mouse?
You should have control there. How about now?
Let's see here. I don't think so. Of course we're having technical difficulties.
Oh, right, of course, right? Why wouldn't we have technical difficulties, right? Looks like you have control now. Do you want to try to give it another try?
Yeah, let me just see here.
Oh, it's flipping around on my end over here.
There we go. Yeah, let me go
All right,
back.
Perfect. All right,
All
good.
right, great. All right, well, we're glad everyone stuck with us here as through the mouse here. So here's the big thing. So there's some applications that you can fill out, because there are certain loans that are available, and we'll go into the 2 major loans that are out there. So first of all, there's been 3 pieces of legislation that have passed Congress and that are literally in act right now. The first one pertained to businesses who had an employee who actually contracted the coronavirus. Okay, so if you had an employee who contracted the coronavirus, there's actually tax credits available to you right now. It's $2,000 a quarter per employee that was infected with the virus. The second piece of legislation, which we'll go over, is a disaster loan. And then the third piece is the CARE Act. And we'll go through the disaster loan and the CARE Act in a little bit more detail. But what you really want to remember is that you need to ensure that you are submitting a flawless loan application, okay, and that you're taking full advantage of all the tax credits, the tax deferrals, and other incentives that are being offered by the government. And you got to be careful to manage your cash flow, right? This is an important time to do so. So let's kind of walk into this. Let's get to the next slide here. Hey, Jen, can you just hit the next slide here? I'm, again, having some issues, I guess. All right, so here's what's available. Is we have payroll tax credits for sick employees, and that's up to $2,000 per quarter. And then if you can just keep rolling through the next ones here. We have the disaster loans, which are up to $2 million. That's the max that is given out per disaster loan. The next one that's available is there's an employee retention credit that's up to $10,000 in wages per employee, and we'll go over that a little bit later on. The next thing that's available here is you are enabled to defer your payroll taxes right now. So you're actually able to defer your payroll taxes that were due in April 1st. You're able to defer those. Next, we have forgivable loans. So the forgivable loans, which is also coming under the name of the Paycheck Protection Program, so PPP. So if you're hearing the president or government officials mention PPP, that's the same thing as the forgivable loans that was brought out in the CARE Act. And that's up to $10 million per business, although it's based off of a calculation, so it's not like you just get $10 million. And yes, you don't have to pay it back if you follow a few guidelines that the government has outlined really nicely. The next one here that's available is you can apply for an emergency grant up to $10,000. So that's something that you can apply through under the SBA, and they can give you a $10,000 grant, which can end up being forgiven as well. So there's a lot of benefits to that. And then next here, what we got is you can defer your payroll taxes in 2020. So you can defer 50% of your payroll taxes in 2020 and decide that the government is giving you the option to pay those in 2021. And then your payroll taxes for 2021, you can defer half of those and pay those in 2022. So the government's actually not only providing you some money up front in these loans, but they're also giving you some payroll tax credits. And then they're also allowing you to defer some of your payroll taxes themselves. So there's a lot of funds that are out there, a lot of moving parts that you need to keep track of. But if you do it right, there's a lot of money available. And there's one more thing here that's available right now for you. And those revolve around net operating losses. If you don't know what a net operating loss is, you want to get with your tax preparer and talk about those, because this is another great source of income that you can, not income, this is another great source of cash that's available to you. So for example, in the past 3 years, if you have had a net operating loss, let's just say in 2019 you filed and you had a loss in 2019. Normally, you're allowed to carry over those losses into the next year, okay, to help offset future taxes. However, the government is now allowing you to go back up to 5 years and take any taxes you have paid, apply your loss from 2019, 18, or 20, go back 5 years and apply those losses and get the money up front today, instead of having it carry over into the future. So for some of you, that can be an astronomical amount of money. I mean, tens of thousands of dollars. So that's really important, and that's something that's available right now as well. So next year we'll talk about what's coming soon. So you probably have all heard the president and a lot of the cabinet members have already, your senators have already talked about additional stimulus packages that are coming down the pipe. So we know from hearing at least the president and a lot of the senators that they are looking to earmark even more money towards small businesses and individuals themselves and families. So there's more stuff that's going to come. I would suspect that a lot of that's going to be smaller in scope, that there'll be less money, and actually a lot of it I would expect to be earmarked towards specific industries that they feel are unrepresented and overly hurt by COVID-19. So you want to make sure that you're always keeping your eyes open, because we've already had 3 bills that have passed, and there's more that is coming without a doubt. So let's go into a little bit more detail on the next slide here. And we're going to talk about, the title of this slide is PPP. Again, that stands for Paycheck Protection Program. And the 7A is what the SBA calls this type of a loan. And it's a forgivable loan. So it's like a grant, which means free money, literally free. And we'll kind of cover that here in the next few slides here. So you can apply for up to $10 million. Okay, but it's not like you can ask for $10 million. It's actually based off of a calculation that we'll get to in an upcoming slide. On the next slide here, if you use, so the government's going to give you money, and if you use that money to pay for payroll, rent, and utilities in an 8-week period, you don't have to pay that money back to the government. And it's not included as income. So you're not taxed on it. So let me say that again. The government's going to give you money. They're going to require that you take that money and you spend it within an 8-week time frame. And they're telling you you have to spend it on 3 things: payroll and utilities. And then if you're renting a building for rent, if you own that building that you're using for your business, then they'll allow you to use it for the interest on the mortgage you have. So if you use it on payroll, utilities, and rent/mortgage, the government will forgive that loan, which means the government will literally give you this money to use it for payroll, rent, and utilities. And again, it's not included in your income. So it's free. Free, free, free. There's no strings, there's no hidden tricks, there's nothing. It's literally free if you use it in 8 weeks and for payroll, rent, and utilities. There's a formula. They want you using 75% of it for payroll. So that's the only kicker in there. But yeah, you've read it correctly. It's free. Okay? So this is something where all you have to say is that you have been economically injured by that. Okay, so if you've lost business, if you haven't been able to provide your services, if you haven't been able to go out and do inspections because the government has put you on shutdown, because people don't want you in the building, what have you, then you can apply for this money and the government will give it to you. And if you use it in 8 weeks for payroll, rent, utilities, you don't have to pay it back. All right. So next year we'll show you, here's the law that was actually written in the CARE Act. This kind of shows you that what I'm telling you is accurate. So the government is going to take your past, the way they calculate how much money they're going to give you is you're going to take your average total monthly payroll over the last 12 months. They're going to take the average monthly payroll for that 12-month period, and they're going to multiply that by 2.5. All right. So if we just do some really simple basic math, if your average monthly payroll is $10,000, and that was the average for the past 12 months, it was $10,000 per month. If you multiply that by 2.5, they're going to give you $25,000. That's the calculation that the government is making. And so they're going to give you $25,000. And again, that $25,000 will be free if you use it to pay payroll, utilities, and rent. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to incentivize businesses to keep people employed. Even if they're staying at home, you pay them, the government's going to give you the money for free to pay them. So again, the government is trying to give you money to keep people employed. So here's some things that you're going to need to apply for the forgivable loan. You're going to need to provide payroll information. Okay, so they're going to require you to provide 941 and 940s. And just so everyone understands, These loans here, the PPP, which again stands for the Paycheck Protection Program, and that's part of the CARE Act, the big $2 trillion bill that that the president signed. These loans are being given out through banks. So the banks are the lenders in this case. Okay, so every bank's a little different. So when you hear me say, here are some things you're going to need, really varies by bank, but here are the things that I found that every bank's going to require. You're going to need to provide payroll information. You're probably going to have to provide your 941 and your 940s and a payroll summary. Additionally, you'll have to go through some underwriting at the bank, which means they're going to ask you for some information. Here are things we know they will not ask you for. There will not be any credit checks. They will not check your personal credit score. They're not going to ask you for, most likely they won't ask even for tax returns. But they'll ask you for some things, copies of your driver's license, maybe your articles of incorporation for your business. The most important thing you need to remember, though, is that in order for the loan to be forgiven, which means that you won't have to pay it back, you need to prepare an accounting package showing how you dispersed the funds that the bank gave you. So you're going to need to show how you took that money and used it for payroll, and that you used it for utilities, and that you used it for rent. Okay, so that's really important. So the money when they give it to you is a loan. It's actually only a loan at 1%, believe it or not. But it's a loan that can be forgiven. You just have to go back after the 8 weeks and say, hey, I want my loan forgiven, and here's the documentation of how I dispersed the funds in accordance with the loan covenant. And so long as you do that, the money's free. You'll never see this again. This is absolutely crazy. I tell people all the time. I have friends who call me up because I'm in the finance industry here, and they think that it's a joke or there's strings attached. There is none. This is money so long as you've been economically injured by it. If you've lost business because of this, if you couldn't operate because we're on they call it the stay home mandates, then you can apply for this and get this funding. All right. And it's important because if you do it right, it is free, 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 free. I can't say it any more forcefully than it's free. So that's the forgivable loan. And again, that forgivable loan is PPP, Paycheck Protection Program. Why do they call it that? Because they're giving you that money to pay employees. All right. So even if you let them go, you can hire them back, and you get money to pay them for 8 weeks. All right. So that's PPP. The second loan that's out there is an actual loan. It's called the disaster loan. Disaster loans, what are they? Historically, disaster loans are meant for when a hurricane comes through, a tornado hits, a flood happens in your area. The Small Business Administration opens up and they provide disaster loans for businesses, small businesses, to help you kind of get back on your feet. Because if you have a flood and you're closed for a month, obviously you've been hurt, the government steps in, and they're called 7B loans. So COVID-19 was the first time that a non-natural disaster was considered a disaster. So it's really kind of interesting. Right now, the government initially put $7 billion towards disaster loans. There's now $10 billion towards it, okay? So you can apply up to $2 million for a disaster loan. And again, it's not like you go in and apply for $2 million and they give it to you. It's based on a number of factors, most of which are not transparent to us. We don't know exactly what they base it off of. But you can use these funds for all business operations. So PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, is used for payroll, rent, utilities. The disaster loan can be used for anything except for growth. And what does that mean? It means you can't go out and start, marketing your business or doing stuff that was that you weren't doing before. But you can use it for inventory, for overhead, fixed debt. So if you have a lease or if you have a mortgage, you can use it to pay that stuff. So there's a broader scope of things that you can use the disaster loan for. Next, to be clear on the next slide here, we say like, hey, you do have to pay this back. So the disaster loan is a loan, and it won't be forgiven. Although it can be, it probably won't be, okay? So that's something you'll have to pay back. Now, to understand that loan a little bit better, that loan is typically a 7 to 15 years in term and length. The maximum interest rate that the government can, or the SBA can charge you is 3.75%. So it's a heck of a freaking loan, right? In terms of the interest rate. You're not going to get a lower interest rate than that, unless PPP, which is only 1%. But these are really amazingly low interest loans, and it works like a mortgage payment. And then you pay it back monthly, okay? Here's on this side here, the last bullet it shows you. And this is really important. There's so much confusion out there. There really is. And hopefully this helps. And things are changing, so there's going to be more confusion. But you can get both. You can apply for both PPP and a disaster loan. You can apply for both of those, okay? And if you get both, the only restriction is the disaster loan funding cannot be used towards payroll, rent, and utilities. So they won't let you double dip. So if you get PPP and the disaster loan, PPP is for payroll, rent, utilities. The disaster loan you can use for everything else. All right. So that's the differences there. So next year we'll go over some key provisions, and we'll go over this kind of quickly. But you can defer your payroll taxes over the next 2 years. We talked about that. So you can defer 50% of the payroll taxes in 2020 until 2021. And then another 50% in 2021 into 2022. It's up to you, though. You don't have to defer them, but you can. You can get your net operating losses back in your cash now, which is huge. If you don't know about this, you need to check with somebody. You need to check with your CPA. Next is you can get the payroll tax credit up to $10,000 in wages per employee. That's another one there. The next one is you can apply for an emergency grant with a disaster loan. So when you apply for the disaster loan, you can ask for a $10,000 emergency grant, which the government says they'll pay out in 3 days. And that's 3 days of when they review your application, not when you submit it. And if you're later denied that disaster loan, that grant becomes, it's just that, it's a grant, which means you don't have to pay it back. So again, free money. And then you can take out money from your retirement up to $100,000 penalty free. And normally there's a penalty for taking out your retirement. Now they're allowing you to take out money out of your retirement penalty free so that people can have access to money in order to keep their businesses going. So those are other key provisions. And there's a ton of other local and state loans that are available. I just listed out, 6 of them here, but there's a bunch. All right. So in addition to what the federal government is offering, which is again the Paycheck Protection Program, the disaster loans, and then they had the employee credit if you had an employee who contracted COVID-19. The feds are handing out that money, but you also have state and local government loans that are out there. So I would be active and aggressive if you need loans to obtain them and apply for them. So those are what's available right now. And again, please note that this is changing daily. It's amazing that the Small Business Administration just yesterday, even though the Paycheck Protection Program came out on Friday, the guidelines they provided banks on Friday were called the interim final decision. Keyword being interim. So yesterday they came out with even more clarification on what these loans were about, how you could apply for them, what's considered a payroll wage. So things are constantly changing. I highly recommend that you are paying attention to everything or work with somebody who is helping out people with these loans, who knows what's going on, because there's a lot that's changing, which means there's more money available to you. And again, a lot of this is free money, so you want to make sure you can get it for free. And these loans are really low interest loans. So if there's ever time you needed a loan, there's no better time to take advantage of these low interest rates that are out there through the SBA, through your local and state governments. So that's the broad overview of what's available. You can always, before I hand this over to Jen and to any questions, you guys can put up any questions in the chat. You can also raise your hand and Jen will kind of call on you and we'll do our best to answer what questions we have. But if you have any questions, you can reach out to me directly. I can do my best to answer any questions or point you in a direction of someone else who could help you better. There is my email address and our phone number here at Inspect Point. So feel free to give us a call. Look, we're here to help, all right? There's a lot going on out there. We're just trying to inform you of what's available. So hopefully you found this helpful. And Jenna, I'll turn this back over to you.
All right, perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jake. That was a lot of really great information. And we have, I see a hand raised, but I have a question here in the chat area. I think this is in regards mostly to the PPP. But what happens if an employee says that they want to stay home and get paid? Do they actually have to be working kind of like out in the field specifically kind of in relation to our industry? What happens if they're still on the books but they prefer to stay home for safety reasons? Would they still qualify for that PPP?
That is a fantastic question. Fantastic, and it's the one I get the most. So the answer is yes. So literally the government's going to give you money to pay employees, and those employees can sit at home. Now, they won't be able to collect unemployment and get paid by you, but again, the government's giving you money to help keep people employed and to help keep them off the unemployment line. So you're going to be able to pay your employees 2 months worth of their salary, of their wages, and they can sit at home and do nothing, and you can still pay them. Because what the government's trying to do, and such a great question, is they just want people to have money. They don't want people to be economically slaughtered, so to speak, during this awful time. So they're giving businesses money to pay to employees, even if, like the president says this all the time, he says, we're paying employees to have them sit at home. So yes, it's okay to give employees money, even if they're sitting at home and cannot do what they normally do. They want you to pay them. So that's a great question. And yes, you can give them money. And yes, there'll be times when people choose to sit at home. They might make more money off of unemployment. And that's okay too. But you can pay them with this money and they can sit at home and get paid by you. And I think it builds a lot of goodwill. So I tell everyone who asks me, I'm like, what a great time to build goodwill with your employees. We're going to give you money and sit at home. So yes, great question.
Now, Jake, just to piggyback on that too, there's another question just in regards to can you require someone to come into the office if with the PPP or any of this information? Can you make them come into the office? Or is that falls outside the scope of this?
Yeah, listen, that's more of a labor thing.
Okay.
So I don't want to say you don't have. Let me put it this way: they don't have to come in. So you don't need to force them to come in. And it's not like, hey, I'm only going to pay you if you come in. PPP will allow you to pay them and tell them to sit at home. So, and one thing I would just say, just out of this, is like I would not want to force anyone to come in, especially if they're fearful, if they think they can get sick, because the government is giving you money even if they sit at home.
Okay. All right, perfect. All right, well, thank you. We've got another question here. We've got, when do we start paying the employees with this money, especially if they are not given the money or if they don't know if they're getting the money? So when should they start paying the employees with this money?
Well, that's going to be stipulated by the bank when they are giving the funds. And the direction and the guidelines has been within 8 weeks of when the company, the business gets the funding. So you're going to apply with your bank. They're going to set up a time to either chat with you real quick to verify some information so you'll know the loan is coming. And then you'll have 8 weeks from the time you get money into your bank account to disperse the funds. So that gives you time to, contact your employees, let them know what's going on, tell them that, hey, money's on the way to them and that you're going to continue to pay them during these tough times.
Okay. All right.
And just so you know, if anything that I'm saying is unclear, ask a follow-up. Put in the chat. Jen will get that
Yep.
to me, or raise your hand. There's a lot. Just so you know, don't feel bad. There's a ton of confusion.
Yes.
Okay, and everyone's got their own little. Hey, I have an exception over here, or my case is a little different. Feel free to ask away.
Now, speaking of that, Jake, we do have one question in regards to one person actually applied at JP Morgan Chase, and they haven't responded to their inquiry, and they heard from another bank that the money is already gone. What should they do at this
Oh, geez. Perfect question. And
point?
this is where it really is. This is where a lot of the confusion comes around. Okay, so let me start by saying that banks who typically disperse SBA loans and such, they are not prepared for the number of people coming to them. So just imagine the government's handing out all this free money, and there's 30 million small businesses in this country, and they're all rushing to the bank at one time saying, give me my money, give me my money. The banks are overwhelmed. I can tell you that right now. Although the government will sit there and say, oh, this money's flowing out right now, it's not. And if it is, it's coming out in trickles, because literally the banking system's not prepared for 30 million businesses to come all ask for a loan all at one time. Okay, so be patient. Like Chase, I know, for example, if you filled out their paperwork online, you're in the queue with them. They will get to you. It might take a week, it might take a day. I don't know, but don't expect something to be immediate. I think the government has kind of misled some people thinking this is happening right away. It's going to take time, but you want to get into the queue as soon as possible. So just understand that it's the banks are being asked to do something that's really unfathomable. I mean, imagine if suddenly, you had an extra 5,000 people calling you up today asking you for an inspection to be done tomorrow. It's impossible. You got no prepared for that. And that's what's happening here with the banking system. So what I would tell you though is get in touch with your bank, apply, and sit tight. Okay, it's going to take some time. It's going to take more time than the government probably wants to admit. But there's been a lot of great United States senators I've seen out there. Marco Rubio's one who's tweeted a lot, and it doesn't matter what affiliation you are, but of saying, hey, they know there's problems with PPP, they're working their best, and the SBA is trying to streamline this process. So hang tight in there, okay? It's coming, it will take a while.
All right, perfect. So we've got a couple more questions in the queue, but we actually have a live question. So Jonathan, I'm gonna unmute you, and then let me just. All right, Jonathan, are you there?
He might be.
Now I see. I think you might be connected to your computer. Looks like you're self-muted on your end. So are you able to unmute yourself on your end?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yep, I can hear you.
Good. All right. I had a question about the payroll again. I've been paying my employees in the meantime while waiting for this loan to come through. So when this loan does come through, I just pay back myself through the company for the money I laid out, or I don't pay, or I'm not supposed to pay them.
Great question, Jonathan. Real quick, what part of the country are you from?
New York.
New York. All right, great. So are we. It's not paying yourself back. They're using this money is going to be used for the 8 weeks after you get funding. Okay. So it's not, you can't go back and say, oh, I paid these people, last month, and I'm just going to take this money the government gave me, and it's for the wages I paid, 2 weeks ago. That's not how it works. You've got to use it for the 8 weeks after you get the loan.
I thought it was from February 15th. I thought it said, like backdated.
February 15th is the guidelines of saying when you had employees. So what that's the February 15th that you're seeing out there is it's trying to help prevent theft. It's trying to help prevent people from saying who didn't have an employee from hiring an employee on February 16th and saying, aha, I have an employee now, so give me money. Or if people were not leasing a building and didn't have rent, you got to prove that you had this building, this rent prior to February 15th. That's what the February 15th means. It's not, hey, go back and, to cover February 15th payroll. It's just used as a verification of your business operations.
So I have to stop. I should not be paying my employees or myself until this money comes through then.
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the money the government gives you through PPP, you cannot have that loan forgiven if you try to say you used it for payroll that you made today prior to you getting the funding.
Right. But so if I pay them, I'm not getting that money, but I'm just paying that out of my pocket.
That's correct.
Not out of the company's pocket.
That's correct. Yeah.
So I have to stop paying myself and
not going to be reimbursed by the government.
Okay.
Great question.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking. That's fantastic.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's part of where the confusion is. So everyone who's on here right now listening that's why there's a lot of confusion. You want to make sure that you are working with someone who can guide you through these times, because there's a ton of confusion and people are hearing or reading things the way they want to hear and read them. So be careful.
Perfect.
What do we got next, Jennifer?
Yeah, we've got a lot of great questions. We've got a lot in queue here. So we've got another question that asks, will any of this cover employees working less time in the office? This person has children and they'd like to work from home more often during the quarantine time for their safety. So will this cover employees working from home less time?
Absolutely. You can use this money you can use this money to tell people not to come in and even not to work. So you can definitely use it for people who are going to work home during this time who are working. Yes, that is exactly what you can use it for. And it's exactly what the government wants you to use it for.
Perfect. We've got a question about people who bank with Wells Fargo. They were told Wells Fargo is not allowed to do these loans. So what options do people who bank with Wells Fargo have?
This is a really tough one, okay? And this is, I just have to take a breath because I think there's a lot of information out there that it's causing a lot of panic in the community. So Wells Fargo yesterday announced that they were going to stop accepting applications. Okay, and it clearly, with Wells Fargo being the largest bank, it freaked everybody out. Okay, don't expect that to be long term. Again, what's happened here is these banks were literally, and when I say these banks, all these banks, all 1,200 SBA approved lending banks and non-banks, there's some non-banks in there, were overwhelmed. Many of them are not accepting the applications, or they're letting you put them in and you won't hear from them for a week. They're just overwhelmed, okay? So I don't expect Wells Fargo that to go on for much longer. I don't think the government will allow it. That being said, there are other non-bank lenders out there. There's a lot of them actually. So there are companies they're considered non-banks. And basically they distribute small business administration loans, but you don't have a checking account with them. So there's hundreds of those that are available to you out as well. So typically what I tell my people that I've been helping out here is that you want to apply with your bank, and obviously Wells Fargo right now is saying we're not accepting them. Don't take that as it's written in stone. It will change, I'm sure of it. But you'll also probably want to get with a non-bank SBA lender. Okay, so if you go to the SBA's website, they'll actually have a list of all their lenders available. So I would suggest you get in line with one of them, but be prepared. This is going to be a very delayed process, all right? And I thank the government for giving the money out to people who need it. I think that they are overly optimistic about, oh, this money's really flowing. It is flowing, but the system was, it was a 1-inch pipe when they need a 10-foot hose. It's going to take some time. And the Wells Fargo thing, for those of you with Wells Fargo, I'm sorry you had to hear what they put out there. I think they did a really poor job of that. I think what they really meant to do was just to say, hey, our system's overwhelmed, because other banks have said this. Once we get more of these processed that are already in the queue, we'll open this back up. And I think that's what you'll see what will happen. But get with a non-bank as well out there. Cover both ends of there. But I'm sorry you had to hear that stuff. You're going to hear more of it. It's just there's too much going through the system right now.
Right.
That's a tough one, Jennifer.
Yeah, yeah, that no one ever likes to hear that, that's for sure.
That's part of the confusion that's out there.
Yeah, yeah. So it looks like we've got one more question, and it has to do with the net operating losses. So the question is, getting back to the net operating losses and the government turning the NOL into cash, will the government treat a capital gain loss in the same way?
That's a great question, and I don't have enough info on that. I don't. I don't want to.
Okay.
I don't want to give advice on something that I'm not prepared to answer. That I don't have enough info to answer. So that is one I can't answer for you right now.
Okay. All right. So I guess I'll put it out there then. That's all the questions that I have in the queue, and I don't see any hands raised. So I'll just throw it out there. Does anybody else have any other questions for Jake at this time? If you do, just raise your hand. And then if not, or just drop that into the questions area. These have been some really great questions.
Fantastic questions.
Yeah,
really
great. All right, so I think that's all we've got for questions. I'm doing just a quick scroll and I don't see any pop up, any hands raised. I haven't seen any other questions come in. Oh, one more. Oh, another question. Good question. So when will we be notified, and how will you be notified if you get that $10,000 grant?
Great question on the $10,000 grant. So for the grant and the disaster loan, actually now they've changed it. So when you apply for the disaster loan, they give you an option to apply for the grant. You'll be notified by the SBA. Okay, so when you went on to the SBA website and you applied for the grant, they gave you a case number. They might not have called it a case number, I forget what they refer to it as, but they gave you a number, and you will be notified by the SBA. So what's going to happen is the SBA, and it's typically a longer process, just so you know. I've had people who applied for that 10 days ago now, so I've heard back. So once they assign a caseworker to you, the SBA is going to email you at the email address you applied with. And then you'll get notified, they'll set up a time, and you'll know about the $10,000 grant. And at that point, they'll ask you to submit further information to apply for the disaster loan. And that's when, if you get denied for the disaster loan, you still get the $10,000 grant, which is fantastic. Another great question.
And then, Jake, just to confirm too, that just another question about it, and then just for you to confirm too, that $10,000 grant, that is forgivable, right? That's free?
That is. Now,
Okay.
understand how this really works, and this is where things get tricky, and you got to really make sure you got someone guiding you in the right direction on this, is PPP, which is for the forgivable, which is based on the paychecks. They're going to give you a certain amount for that. If you apply for the grant as well, the grant comes out of the PPP amount. So you can't double dip, but the grant is a way for you to get monies hopefully faster. So they tie into each other, and that might be confusing. If it is, I apologize. Feel free to ask another question. But basically, that grant is forgivable, yes.
Okay.
So the answer is the grant forgivable? Yes, it's a grant. That's the whole point of grants, is they are forgivable. So yes.
Okay. And then question about Citibank and California. Have you heard anything about anything coming out, kind of like the Wells Fargo thing? Have you heard anything about Citibank and anything in California, anything like that?
Listen, take this and apply it to every bank, no matter what bank it is and where they're located is. This is going to take time,
Yep.
okay? Especially if you haven't applied yet. If you haven't applied, you are going to be looking at even longer wait times, okay? Because so many people have already applied. But just know this is that typically when you apply, you get an email back saying that hey, they received your application and you're in the queue. Sometimes they don't, which is a shame. They should, especially now. But rest assured, you're in the queue. It's just going to take time. You are going to continue to hear. One thing I can guarantee, things are going to change, and I can guarantee banks are going to start and stop, meaning that they are going to process the applications they have on hand. They'll open up the process, meaning they'll allow more people to apply. And then once their queue gets full, they'll cut it off again. So be prepared for that. So that's why I try to tell everyone you're going to hear a lot of things out there. You're going to hear a lot of people are getting money, but you're going to hear about more people not getting money and being like, where do I stand? What's going on? So be prepared for that to happen. Work with someone who can guide you through and really put expectations on when you can expect things. Expect things. The real reputable people out there are going to tell you don't expect something to happen today or tomorrow. It's an unrealistic expectation. These banks are flooded. It's just not going to happen that quickly. Now they will streamline it, but hang in there, whether it's Citibank, whether it's Wells Fargo, whether it's Chase, and whether or not it's the small mom and pops. I mean, these small mom and pops are hurt too. They're just not prepared either. So hang in there. I don't want to tell you a word because once I hear one thing, it literally changes the next minute.
Yeah. All right. So looks like the queue. Any other questions or anything out there? These have, like I said, this has been great. Great questions. Let me just make sure I didn't miss any.
Yeah, don't leave the webinar without asking a question. If you have a question, ask it now because the other people on this webinar are learning from the questions you're asking. So there's
Yep.
no dumb questions right now.
And then too, if I sometimes, if you think of a question after the fact, you can always feel free to email Jake or myself. Of course, if you email me, I'm going to forward it along to Jake because Jake is the expert in this realm, and I will not even attempt to answer one of those questions. But let me just see. Anything else? Any hands up? All right, no hands up. And oh, thank you for that. We've got a good job, and thank you very much for the information. No, thank you very much for attending for that. Um, so, all right. So I think that might be all of the questions that we have. Any final words, Jake, before we wrap up?
Stay safe and stay healthy. And if you have any questions, reach out to us. We're here to offer any assistance we can.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. So up on the screen is Jake's information. Like I mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Jake. You can reach out to me, but like I said, I'm going to forward it along to Jake so he can get those questions answered for you. That number on the screen is our general phone number. So if you have any questions and want to give us a call, just let us know. Give that number a ring. This webinar is being recorded and will be emailed out to you. So if you want to reference any of the material again later, you can, and then feel free to, of course, share this with others as well. But thank you so much for attending today. And like Jake said, stay safe, and any questions, send them our way.